Hi, welcome to a very special edition of Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Premier of the Yukon Territory, Dennis Fentie, was a rambunctious kid raised by a single mom, and he left home at the age of 14. He ran a successful trucking business in the Yukon Territory until he decided to throw his hat into the political ring. He will soon be Canada's longest-serving premier, and he joins me now to talk all about life beyond politics. Premier Dennis Fentie, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's really great to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me.
You've traveled a long way for the interview.
Yes, the Yukon is quite a distance from Ottawa, but these days it's a pretty easy trip to make.
Do you get to spend most of your time in your home province, or are you often out and about?
I think collectively during the course of any year, a lot of our time as politicians in the Yukon is spent in the Yukon. Mm-hmm. But in my capacity as Premier and Finance Minister, there are a number of occasions throughout the course of any calendar year where travel is a requirement.
Yeah.
So with the Council of the Federation and First Ministers and Finance FPTs, which is Federal, Provincial, Territorial gatherings, there's a lot of that that happens during the course of a calendar year. But I think for the most part, we're able to stay in the territory and do our work locally, which is very important.
Sure. Do you find it tiring, all of this extra traveling and the responsibilities that you have, which are really so important to the province? Do you find all of that exhausting, or is it exhilarating?
Well, first off, we're not a province.
No, a territory.
Territory, which we're quite unique in that aspect, because in the Yukon we do have provincial-like powers,
right,
but we don't have a crown and right or ownership. But as far as the exhilarating part, the business of politics is indeed very exhilarating because of the rapid-fire situation you're in. Mm-hmm. But it also is very exhausting, and a lot of that has to do with travel. For example, I have a very difficult time traveling from the west to the east because of the time change. So it takes quite a bit of getting used to before you start getting a proper sleep at night and so on. So it can become very exhausting over time, and it's something that you have to be very conscious of and pace yourself. And that's important in this business,
yeah,
is pacing oneself.
You've had the chance, as you were just saying, to travel across the country and to see different provinces, different territories, how politics is done in those places. Is there a difference between how politics is done elsewhere and how politics is done in the Yukon? Is there a different feeling to it?
I think if you were to use that type of comparison, you'd have to compare the territories. Politics in the Yukon is very similar to politics in the other provinces. But governance and politics in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut is really quite different. In those two territories, the style of politics and governance is consensus, which is directly linked to how Aboriginal people, First Nations, governed for thousands of years by consensus. So that is quite a difference. It's a scenario where decision-making is based on reaching consensus, where in our case, with majority governments and partisan politics, decisions can be made by using that majority. So our decision-making process is really quite different than the other two territories. But as far as the 10 provinces, the evolution of responsible government is very similar to what has transpired in the provinces, although we're quite new in terms of that particular status we have as a responsible government these days.
You've been Premier for quite a while now, quite a good long time. And it's been an interesting time too. I mean, you've had your highs and your lows as well during that time period. Did you, when you were a little kid, did you think you were ever going to end up in a government position, or as Premier even of a territory?
No.
No.
It's not something that I can recall, even considered briefly. That's not the path that I chose or decisions I made in life were never really linked to politics or being in government or anything like that. So it's not something that I can say that I had a desire for during the course of life, or something that I had given a great deal of thought to during the course of my life.
So then how did it happen?
Well, that's interesting, because I was actually approached to represent my community or my riding. People in my community started this. They approached me. From there, that evolved into a particular party, representatives of a particular political party approaching me, and that's what started me thinking about it. That happened in the mid-1990s. Prior to that, for some of the years just before that, mid part of the 1990s, I involved myself in things like Chamber of Commerce and in other types of societies like the Forestry Association in the Yukon, these types of things. So, you know, you start getting into the political realm when you enter those particular areas, like the Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
It is a body that does have links to the political arena. And when I was approached, that's what started me thinking about it. At first I was hesitant, didn't really want to make that decision and enter the arena. But after a number of conversations, I got to the point where I did make the decision, and the rest is history.
What made you hesitant?
I had to really come to grips with the decision on whether I had the something to offer, or is it something that I could do, because I recognized that politics is not an easy choice to make. It's not a career choice, at least my belief. It's a life's choice. And to make that decision, you have to make it for the right reasons, so it takes time. And a lot of that was why I was hesitant. I was trying to figure that out in my own mind.
What made you decide that you did have something that you wanted to offer?
Well, I think after deliberating and talking to people, especially in my community, I made the conscious choice that I could make that life's choice, because with that comes sacrifices. And in doing that, the desire started to manifest itself on me going ahead and entering the political arena. And of course, I have to admit that it was something new, and you
politics
know,
is never
and
boring.
it was exhilarating, just even thinking about it.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I made that decision, entered the arena, and as I said, the rest is history.
Were you with your partner, Lorraine, at that time?
Yes.
How did she react?
She's been very supportive. It's not an easy thing for any family member when, like myself,
Yeah.
enters politics. It's not an easy thing, because there is a lot of sacrifice to be made. But
And there's
she's been
criticism.
there's criticism, and there's all kinds of things that go with it. But all in all, very supportive. And for anyone to be successful in the political arena, those around you are a great contributor to that. If you have difficulties in those areas, it's even more difficult to be in the political arena. So, you know, I'm fortunate in many ways that those around me were very supportive and encouraged me a great deal.
What about your kids? Were they on side too?
Well, you know, it's hard to, I can't really put my finger on that, but most were, all around me were very supportive and
Yeah.
encouraging. But I think young people have a much different understanding of what politics is all about. They kind of live in a bit of a different world.
Right. So they thought you were totally uncool for doing this?
Well, I don't think I've ever been classed as being uncool, depending on how you define it. I have been quite a, I don't know how you'd label it, but I've done many things in life that are linked to what I always thought was what normal people do.
Right.
and the issue of cool or so on, children tend to migrate to that, and I've never had problem with young people and myself interacting.
Tell me, speaking of young people, what you were like as a kid, a little kid. Do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember quite a bit of being young, though my life was totally dependent upon my upbringing. So those memories are obviously part of that. Raised by a single parent, my mother. So, you know, that had a lot of impact on me younger, and probably is a major it has made a major contribution to what I am today as an older person, as an adult. But memories for me as a young child were always very positive. I can't ever say I lacked for anything. You know, my mother provided for me in many ways, and allowed me to be myself in many instances. Like, I was very, as a child, very keen on sports, and she made sure that I could get involved in sports and things like that. And I guess I could say I was somewhat of a rambunctious child. I had a lot on the go.
I mean, your mom and dad separated when you were very, very young, and your mom took over full duties for raising you. She must have been quite an extraordinary person.
Yes, I was 6 months old, so I don't remember that part, obviously. I think my earliest recollections were around 3 years old. We were living in a place called Waterways, Alberta, which used to be the real community. Now it's Fort McMurray. But, yeah, my mother was a very independent person. Did a lot of things to ensure that we had a lifestyle that was comfortable, and like I said, she provided for me in many areas, allowed me to be myself and to grow as a child. But I know it was difficult because back in those days, divorcees and single parents, especially women, had a very difficult time in society. So, you know, my recollections are she did have difficulties, but all in all, a very strong person.
Did she have difficulties with other people in the community? Was it neighbors and people who were...
I didn't really observe
Yeah.
those things, but over time it became evident to me that there were difficulties, and I'm not sure if it was neighbors or you know, specific individuals. I just think it was more of a societal issue, and how people looked at single women with children that were not married. It was just a time in our history, I guess, where there were problems in that area. So what she accomplished in raising me was probably quite significant.
Yeah. Did that affect your relationship with her? Were you closer because of it?
No, I you know, it's not an issue of closeness as much as I became very independent myself. So I left home at a very young age.
Like how old?
My first experiences away from the home was around 14 years old.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow, why so young?
As I said, I was a bit of a rambunctious child. Probably quite difficult to handle for one person.
Wow.
Yeah.
So were you asked to leave?
Not really.
No, you just decided you'd forge your own path.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Did she have expectations for you? I mean, did she say, I really want you to go into this line of work, or I want you to apprentice here? Did she have those kinds of expectations for you?
Never specifically.
No.
On a humorous side, though, she always wanted me to find some good use for my big mouth. So,
So you did.
When I was first elected in 1996, I recall her saying, "This is good, son. You finally got a good use for that big mouth of yours." But she never pushed me in any direction.
Yeah.
As I said, she allowed me to be me.
Right.
And in my younger days, sports was virtually everything.
Right.
And I had quite a fixation on equipment. You know, big equipment,
Yeah.
trucks, cats,
Sure.
that type of thing. Because when I grew up in many of these communities, there was a lot of that around me. So as a typical youth, I kind of migrated to those types of things.
What did you do after you left home, essentially, at 14? I mean, where did you go from there?
Well, I first wound up living with a family in Watson Lake, a well-known person, Babe Richards. It's kind of like my surrogate mother, I guess. And then from there, I wound up in a boys' home. Did some time in school in a dormitory in Fort St. John. So those were years like from about 14 to 16 where all that was happening.
Yeah.
And actually I entered the workforce around 16. I actually quit school. I think my first job I was working on a pipeline for Flint Engineering in the Beaton River area out of Fort St. John. Until I found out I was under 18 and you can't be covered with compensation doesn't cover you, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, little by little, in the working world, I started to progress into things and ultimately got into the trucking business.
Like long haul trucking, or?
Yeah, all types of trucking, but on the larger scale, big rig trucking.
For someone whose mother suggests that he might like to talk, trucking seems to me like it would be kind of a lonely business, because I guess you've got your radio, but you don't have much else on a long drive.
Yeah, you have a lot of time by yourself, of course, but you know, it is a profession. Probably not an easy one. I mean, I've over the years recognized that it's not a real healthy profession in many cases, and I learned from that. Ultimately, I progressed from driving trucks to owning them, and you know, when I entered the political arena, I divested myself of all those things.
Right.
And I have no intention of ever going back to it.
Yeah.
Because of the experiences that I've had. It's not something I would go back to, because it is a very difficult area to try and make a living in. But during the time I was doing it, I liked it.
Right.
And did good at it.
Yeah.
You know, I made a good living, and I'm thankful for that, because it did contribute, you know, give me something back.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's based on what you put into it anyway. So.
Sure. You sound like you're the type of person who just makes good out of your life. I mean, you take tough situations and you turn them around to work in your favor, or at least to be useful life experiences. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think a lot of that has to do with upbringing. So if you were brought up to recognize that, you know, you're going to have challenges, and the way to deal with them is meet those challenges to the best you can, I think a lot of that becomes part of your fabric, if you will. And that's how you approach life, or anything you do in life, right? Is to do the best you can and try and succeed.
You had a brush with the law that left you in jail, with jail time. You were pardoned for it. But how did that experience shape the person that you are today?
Well, I think, well, obviously I'm not very proud of that time in my life. It wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done. But I think it showed me that if you take responsibility for your actions, you can, and this is the beauty of this country, you are afforded the opportunity to make positive choices in life and become more of an asset to society than a liability. So I think the experience there really solidified that for me. And from that day on, that's exactly what I've been striving to do. Become more of an asset than liability.
You have grandkids too.
Yes.
As well as your kids. What kind of lessons do you try to teach them, or do you just lead by example?
I think more by example. I don't have a lot of time in this business with them, so the time that we have is usually by example, and try and enjoy the time that we are together. But it's limited because of what I do, and of course they're all building their own lives
Sure.
as kids and have their own challenges and problems and issues they deal with. But when we get together, it's basically trying to enjoy the time we have together, but it's all by example. And I think there will come a time when maybe the grandchildren are old enough that they might want to start asking questions, and
that'll definitely happen.
yeah, that'll lead to more or a further contribution that can be made by helping those young people in life.
You've been with your partner Lorraine for a long time now.
Yes.
How did you both meet?
Well, in the community. In a small community, you're going to meet everybody, and over time things happen, and we're at where we're at many years later.
You know, I was interested also in how you ended up in the Yukon, because you were born in Alberta.
Born in Edmonton, Alberta,
right.
Yes.
And moved around a little bit, did some education, you were saying, in BC.
Yes.
And had the experience of traveling through trucking. You knew that there were other places to live. Why did you settle in the Yukon?
Well, just let me go over that. During the course of my life, I've lived in Cranbrook, BC, Waterways, Alberta, High Prairie, Fort St. John, BC, and then Watson Lake, Yukon. The reason that my mother and I wound up in Watson Lake, Yukon is because of mining. My mother was a prospector in later years. In fact, her nickname was Mary Minerals. So I think the reason that brought us to the Yukon is the opportunity and the potential in the mining sector. And that's why we wound up there, and she stayed there until she passed on in 1998.
But she had a chance to see you as an MLA. She
Yes.
had a chance to see you as an elected official.
Yes.
That must have been a source of great pride for her.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was.
So, you ride a Harley. Is this
Yes, I
correct?
do. Yeah. Some people go to therapy. I ride a Harley.
Why is it your therapy?
Well, again, it's very exhilarating, but it's one of those things you can do that is just you and the machine, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. For me, it's calming, and I really like doing it. So, actually, always have.
Yeah.
Motorcycles have been another attraction of mine. So
you don't ever worry about, the fact that you have nothing around you to protect you, other than maybe a helmet.
Well,
some leather.
There is that aspect of riding motorcycles that can be very dangerous, but I think a lot of that has to do with you, the operator of any piece of equipment. Mm-hmm. It's how you operate it, and being very conscious of your surroundings. But yeah, it is a dangerous thing to do.
Is that part of the enjoyment?
The danger aspect?
Yeah.
I never really thought about it that way. I'm very careful. I don't take chances when I ride. So I'm very careful on how I operate that type of machinery, as I've been in all machinery.
Right.
Or even driving a vehicle. I'm very careful and very conscious of my surroundings. So I think the exhilaration comes with the open road and the speed and all those things.
And you'd really have an open road.
Yes, that's the beauty of the Yukon. We have great highways, and we don't have a lot of traffic to fight through, and it is really something when you're out there. Well, mostly by yourself, though I do from time to time ride with others.
Does Lorraine ride with you at all?
No, she doesn't like motorcycles.
No.
So I call it the freedom machine.
I'm sure she appreciates that.
She
probably does.
Yeah, doesn't have a problem with it at
No,
all. Yeah.
no. You had a tumor removed.
Yes.
A few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a cancerous tumor?
Yeah, bladder cancer.
Okay.
But it was luckily early
Yeah.
detection.
Right.
So it was low grade and hadn't progressed to where it penetrated the lining in my bladder or anything like that. So very fortunate.
Absolutely.
And since the surgery, all checkups have been positive,
Yeah.
clean.
Has it changed the way that you live your life?
Oh yeah.
Has it? How?
Yeah. You got to try and get the most out of every day because you never know. Life has a way of hitting you hard.
Right.
So it's probably given me a perspective that actually helps me at my age. I get more out of each day, you know.
Yeah. Besides the freedom machine and the fact that you have this incredibly busy job and you've had this health scare that makes you take life one day at a time,
Mm-hmm.
what else do you do that allows you to have a bit of a life essentially outside of politics?
Well, I do enjoy outdoors. So, you know, I'm very fortunate that I live in a place where the outdoors is so accessible. And that is all seasons, all 4 seasons. So there's a lot of things I do outdoors which I really, really enjoy. And I do also have a river boat, jet boat.
Okay.
So I run rivers quite a bit when I have time in the
Right.
summer. And that is another very enjoyable experience because of you know, what we have in the Yukon, the wildlife, the wilderness, the open space. It's beautiful, it's rugged, it's, you know, something that a lot of people will never, ever experience. I luckily can do it in 15 minutes from my house. I'm in the Liard River.
Have you ever had any run-ins with wildlife?
We see lots of wildlife, but on a river trip, it's not. I don't hunt, by the way. I'm not a hunter. I'd much rather just look at animals. So you see lots of wildlife on the rivers. But speaking of that, on a motorcycle, I had a run-in with a herd of bison.
Did you really?
Yeah, they weren't going to move. They were on the highway, and there was no way I was going to try and go through it with a motorcycle,
No,
speaking of
not.
nothing around me. So I waited for a transport truck to come along.
How long did you wait?
About 10 minutes.
Okay.
And the truck parted the herd, and I followed the truck through.
Fast.
So
fast as
that's
could
the
be.
only wildlife experience I've had on some of the things I do for enjoyment.
What would you like to do next in our last 10 seconds? If there was one thing that you could do after politics, what do you think it would be?
You know, I've never really thought about that, frankly, so I could speculate, I guess, but I can't give you a straight up answer because I've never given it one moment of thought.
That's a good enough answer.
Okay. We'll see. I guess one day I will have to consider what that might be.
But right now
But
you're enjoying
right
it.
now, I haven't given it one thought.
I appreciate that you take the time to be here today. It's been a great pleasure to chat with you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.